All right. Welcome, everybody. It's been a long break since before the holidays. We're not quite ready to start a new series yet, but I figured I wanted to get started learning. So I'm doing a standalone talk tonight, studying Pirkei Avos. And the Mishnayos that I've chosen to teach from Pirkei Avos basically have to do with what I call civics and being a good citizen and taking part in, shall we call it, the electoral process or other aspects that we as private citizens can do on behalf of the government. Everybody knows a week ago, tomorrow night, was a historic election in U.S. history. We have our first African-American president. It was historic for other reasons as well. It was historic because the crisis that the country finds itself now and the world finds itself now, the nuclear threats, the worldwide economic meltdown, make these very uncertain times. The fact that voter turnout was, if I'm not mistaken, at unprecedented levels is also something historic. Apparently, this election touched something in the electorate that replaced apathy with participation. So I wanted to see what our sages had to say on the topic of governments and our interactions with them. And in particular, there are two Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos that I want to look into, and we'll see if time allows. Maybe we'll look at a couple of others. Okay, let's start with page 550. Okay. This is the second chapter of Ethics of Our Fathers. And we're going to look at Mishnah number 3. On page 550, let me read the Hebrew first, then we'll take a look at the English and try to explain it a little bit. The Mishnah says, Hevi Zahirin Barashus, Shemakarvan Laila Adam, Elo Tzarech Asman, Nirin Ka'ohavin, B'shas Hana'asan, Vein Omdam Laila Adam B'shas Dachako. And the English reads, beware of rulers, for they befriend someone only for their own benefit. They act friendly when it benefits them, and they do not stand by someone in his time of need. Okay, so I'm going to contrast this with a later Mishnah, but let's just talk about the plainest meaning over here. Plainest meaning is that, people kind of have it inverted. A lot of times in Western democracies, and especially when you're not living in a battleground state, or even there's a level in my mind of even something less than not being in a battleground state, and that is essentially living in a one-party state, in a state that's never a battleground, where it's always a foregone conclusion which of the two major parties the state is going to go for in a nationwide election, or even very often in statewide or municipal elections. So overwhelming majority of members or voters for one party, and if you're not part of that party, if you're part of the minority party, or if you usually like to vote for the minority party, there's a sense of, this is an exercise in futility. On the other hand, the byword in our culture and our society is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And political cronyism is always good. If you want to hedge your bets, if you're a wealthy person, and you can donate to the maximum that the campaign reform laws will allow, so you donate the max to both candidates. That way, hopefully, or at least so you tell yourself, you've got either one of them in your pocket. Right? No matter who wins, you can hedge your bets, as it were. Right? So basically, what this Mishnah is telling us is political cronyism is not the way to go, because the last laugh, more often than not, is not on the politician but on the donor. There are many, many politicians out there who either rich political donors, kingmakers working behind the scenes in the party, thought that they could manipulate, thought that, listen, I'll install this guy in office and I'll be the power behind the throne. Right? And it didn't work out that way. If I was a greater historian, I could probably cite you lots of examples of those. I mean, just one that comes to mind. I've been reading a lot of books on the Civil War lately. There were a lot of party insiders, Seward, McClellan, who thought that they could manipulate President Lincoln. And to their eternal grief, they found out that it was the other way around. That, this country bumpkin from Kentucky and Illinois outsmarted them all and outmaneuvered them all. But we know, and this is in a certain sense a very cynical mission, at least on the surface it reads very cynically. Okay, we think that the corrupt, self-serving politician, is an invention of Machiavelli. Right? Machiavelli wrote the book The Prince, and there's even an adjective that's worked its way into our language, Machiavellian. And when a guy knows how to pull the strings on other people, how to play off foes against one another, how to do some good selective backstabbing, how to just flex their own muscles when the muscles are flexible. Right? We call that Machiavellian.
Nothing's changed since the Mishnah was written.
What I'm about to say is on the surface level, and this is how Rashi learns the Mishnah. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Okay, don't get too close to the rishus, to the ruling classes, to the ruling people. Whether it's on a municipal level, a state level, a nationwide level. Okay, very often you think that you're currying favor and that you're building up credit and that they're going to owe you favors. Okay. And very, very often it's just the way around. They're just using you. They're just exploiting you. When they need the vote, when they need your help, if we're talking in a less democratic forms of government, which certainly, if you look historically, when this Mishnah was written, it's way, way, way before Western democracies. Okay? But however it is that people get into power, through election, through oaths of fealty, through appointments, right? People have a tendency to want to rub elbows with the rich and powerful. Right? This is what the Mishnah is telling you. Don't do it. It's not a good idea. Right? They'll string you along, they'll use you, and then when crunch time comes, when you need, so to speak, a friend in need, whether for yourself or for the community, very often you're in for a very big disappointment, and you're going to find they do not stand by someone in his time of need. So that's the simple... That's the way the words of the Mishnah read. That's basically the way Rashi, the classic commentary, understands what the Mishnah means. However, Rabbi Yaina disputes this. Rabbi Yaina says, and this is really going to be more consistent with what we're about to read with the next mission, which is really the main one I want to share with you tonight. Right? The Rabbi Yaina says that on the contrary, okay, the power, if you will, the powerful people in a society, but again, he's positing good government. He's positing a just government, not a government that's controlled by a bunch of crooks, by a bunch of venal, self-serving people. Okay? If you have a government that's a good government, if you have a government that's full of people who are really there to serve the public, as it were, really you to the idea of being a public servant. And again, I just want to say parenthetically before I tell you what Rabbi Yaina says, again, we know about Machiavelli, we know about his book named The Prince, and certainly we Yankees, we Americans, certainly, we don't like royalty, we have our brains kind of hardwired towards the idea of power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that the fewer hands that power is consolidated in, the more rife it is for abuse. Right? Our government has checks and balances between the three branches, that not one branch of the government should get too powerful. So we're used to this idea of monarchies being bad. And I would say, again, I'm not the greatest expert student of history, that probably for most of both world history and Jewish history, more often than not, kings have been quite despotic and quite self-serving, and it was the exception to the rule that had the public good in mind and not their own good in mind. Nevertheless, there are notable exceptions to the rule. Somebody said these exceptions to the rule really changed the course of world history. They're the ones who were really the impact monarchs of world history. And there's a concept called noblesse oblige, that sometimes the nobility has a certain kind of forgiving nature, a certain kind of empathic nature. There are notions of honor, there are notions of duty that inform the ruling class, if you will. So what the Meiri says is as follows. The Meiri says that you cannot understand this Mishnah at face value. He says on the contrary. He says it's the ruling party that are the people who have the most integrity. Because they're powerful, they don't have to worry about vengeance from petty squabbles and fights. They can put all their cards on the table. They can stand up for what's right. They have the might, and that allows them to stand up for what's right. However, this is what the Mishnah really means. Okay, if you were going on a natural level, okay, then on the contrary, the best person to befriend would be somebody from the ruling class, because when you befriend a rank and file person, right, it's exactly the same thing. You think you're being friendly to them, and maybe they're just manipulating you, and maybe they'll be fair weather friends, and they won't stand by you at when it's crunch time. So the Meiri says an amazing thing, and it's based on a verse in Mishlei, the Proverbs of King Solomon. Okay? This is Mishlei Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, first verse. Before I read you the verse, I just want to tell you an apocryphal story about this verse, that they say that when Don Yitzhak Abarbanel, one of the great medieval Spanish Rishonim, who was an advisor to Ferdinand and Isabella in pre-expulsion Spain, when he tried to stave off that terrible decree of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, so supposedly this is what, quoting this verse I'm about to read you, this is what Isabella answered him. Okay, let me read and translate the verse for you. Palge mayim lev melech biyad Hashem. Al kol asher yachbot yatenu. Okay, this means as follows. You've got a river, and it comes inland. So anyone who's living by the riverbanks, has lush and fertile ground. Right? On the other hand, if you leave the river wild, as it were, if you don't build irrigation ditches, if you don't build dams, if you don't build levees around the river can be, rather than a source of fertility and blessing, it can be a very destructive force. All right? It can overflow its banks. It can irrigate just the immediate area around it, and then the fields that are more inland are not getting sufficient rain irrigation, and they're not producing anything. So therefore people build what's called palge mayim. Palge mayim are roughly translated as water troughs. Okay? You've got things that you need to divert the water flow from the river, sometimes stop the water flow. You've got to dam it up in a certain place so it should gather in other places. That's what palge mayim refers to. Says King Solomon, Kepalge mayim, the Avnei says that the comparative chaf is missing at the beginning of the pasuk. Kepalge mayim leiv melech biyad Hashem. Like these irrigation ditches, that's what the heart of a king, the heart of a monarch is in the hands of God. Al kol asher yachbot yatenu. Whatever direction he wants to, he turns it this way and that. Right? If it's got to go to the right, it goes to the right. If it's got to go to the left, it's got to go to the left. In other words, okay, first let me finish my apocryphal historical story, and then we'll get back to the mission that we're studying. Isabella supposedly answered Don Abarbanel. She said, look, I'm nothing more than a puppet on a string. God controls me. So, I hear your entreaties, I might understand on a rational level why you're saying that the Jews in my country are very good for the kingdom, even though Torquemada, tells me the opposite. But, the chips are going to fall where they may. I'm just a puppet. I'm just this water trough that the grand schemer of the irrigation scheme, he's going to turn me whichever way he wants. So don't blame me, blame God. And all of a sudden, it's what we call getting frum on somebody. All of a sudden, she's getting frum, she's getting very religious. I'm sure after her own fashion. She was a very religious woman, whatever the case may be. She answered him quoting scripture here, quoting this verse. So says the Meiri that really the meaning of this Mishnah is that, and this really speaks to the conundrum of predestination versus free will. Okay, you think that you're going to curry favor with other people. Okay, you're cozying up to certain people. You're being friendly, especially powerful people, politically well-connected people. You're cozying up to them because you think they're going to return the favor. When the truth of the matter is that they're puppets on a string. The truth of the matter is that whatever they might want to do, maybe the natural human reaction is to have to be grateful, to have one of gratitude. You did me a favor, I'd like to return the favor. So if you were dealing with people who were really autonomous, people who their decisions were their own, that would be one thing. But as the verse says, Palgei Mayim Lev Melech B'Yad Hashem. It's like the water troughs. It's like the irrigation ditches. It's all the hearts of the kings. The hearts of the ruling class are in the hands of God. God will veer it in whatever direction He sees fit. And therefore, it's not, the way the Meiri says it's not a definite Mishnah. He's saying you may find yourself very disappointed. You may find that in your hour of need, they're not there for you. Why aren't they there for you? That was God's decision. That's an imponderable. Right? Maybe, unfortunately, for whatever reason, you need to be going through these hard times without a lot of help. All right? So, that's how the Meiri learns the Mishnah. And the odd thing that the Meiri says is, he says, if this is true of kings, if this is true of politicians, of the ruling class, then it's definitely true of rank and file people, of the peasantry, of the regular citizenry. And the Malbim in Mishlei says, no, that's the verse is being very specific. The average person, and you'll see, I think what Rabbi is saying is very odd, because the Tana of the Mishnah says, be careful, avoid friendships with the rulers, with the powerful people. And the Malbim says, one of the classic commentaries on Mishlei, says that this is something that's very ruling class specific. When you're talking about regular human beings, there's no warning in our Mishnah. Stay away from, don't be friendly with other people, don't do favors for other people, because they'll stab you in the back, when the time comes. There's something that's very specific to the ruling class, because it's unpredictable, so to speak. It's part of a grander scheme of the vast eternal plan, as Tavia said in Fiddler. All right? It's really up to Hashem. So when you're dealing with a ruling class, be careful. Okay, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have another teaching in the Mishnayos and Pirkei Avos, which I think is more, shall we call it, the default setting of how we should look at governments. And again, really understanding not the idea of cronyism, not the idea of trying to cozy up to individuals with a lot of power, but the general idea of being a good citizen and taking part in the political process. Okay, to put my cards on the table, translate it into our contemporary time and place. Okay, vote. Don't stay home and not vote. Register, vote. Do that. Okay, and let me show you what my takeoff point over here is. Turn a few pages. Page 556. Again, I'll start with the Hebrew. And then we'll move on to the English. This is the third chapter, the second Mishnah. Interesting. The first one was second chapter, third Mishnah. This is the third chapter, the second Mishnah. Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim Omer, have a mispal b'shlomo shel malchus. Shel molei ma'ira'ah, ish Yisraelu chayim b'la'ai. The English reads, Rabbi Chanina, the deputy Kohen Gadol, high priest, says, pray for the welfare of the government, because if people did not fear it, a person would swallow his fellow alive. Okay? So, first of all, let me explain to you what that means, a deputy Kohen Gadol. Okay, there was an office in the hierarchy of the temple, when we had a temple in Jerusalem. There was obviously the office of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. I'm sure all of you have heard of that. What you may not be familiar with is that the primary function, some would argue the sole function of that office, of having a high priest, is to do the service one day a year, the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur. Okay? Now, the services that had to be rendered in the temple on Yom Kippur were only fit to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Obviously, a non-Kohen couldn't do it. Non-Kohen can't do a lot of the temple service the other 364 days of the year either. Right? But whatever special service had to be done on Yom Kippur in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, only the Kohen Gadol was allowed to do it. Right? No Kohen Gadol, you're stuck. You're not going to have a Yom Kippur. I'm talking about on a national level. I'm talking about on behalf of the entire Jewish people. So, this being the case, they had an office of deputy, vice, whatever you want to call it, Kohen Gadol. Basically, they had a standard. They had an understudy ready. The show must go on, they say on Broadway. Great Broadway plays have understudies for all the principal actors. If somebody goes down, breaks a leg, has a cold, gets stuck coming to the theater, you put the understudy on. The show must go on. If something should go wrong with the Kohen Gadol, anything from death to certain incidences of ritual impurity, right, that would render him either absent or unfit to do the service on Yom Kippur, you had an understudy, and that was known as the Sgan Kohen Gadol, the vice of the deputy Kohen Gadol. And this Reb Chanina was obviously an early Tana. He was from the early Mishnah period when the temple still stood, and he actually served in this capacity. He held that office of Sgan Kohen, of the deputy Kohen. Why it says Sgan HaKohanim, the deputy of plural Kohanim, is something that I'll get to in a few minutes. At any rate, historically, Reb Chanina lived during the Roman occupation. Okay? Now, I don't have to tell you how much the Jews suffered under the Roman occupation. This was not a benevolent government. This was an imperial government. This was a government that had all kinds of anti-Jewish legislation and persecution. This is a government under which the 10 holy martyrs of the Jewish people that we read about always every year on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av suffered. As a matter of fact, there was another famous Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, who had his skin flayed. No, I got it backwards. That was Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion had an order de fe, was burned at the stake by the Romans, wrapped in a Torah scroll. Okay? These were not nice people. Okay? This was not a benevolent government, not by a long shot. Nevertheless, we're talking about, shall we call it, the lesser of two evils. And the lesson over here, both on a communal and on a personal level, the Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim is teaching us is, you pray for the welfare of a government, even if it's a horrible government. Because governments are preferable to anarchy. Okay, now where do you draw the line? Okay, I'd say you draw the line by when governments start acting in an anarchic manner. What does it mean by anarchy? It says, there's an expression in Latin, homo homini lupus. One man is to another man like a wolf. And that's really what the Mishnah is saying too. All right? If it weren't for the fear of government, right, then everybody would just swallow one another alive. Right? Any of us are fans of Westerns, even Western literature, Western movies. We know about the way law operated in the Old West. Okay? The fastest gun in town was deputized, and then he would turn around and terrorize the whole town. All right? We know how things operate in mob cultures. All right? Again, might makes right. If you've got the fastest gun, if you've got the most assassins on your side, you're in control. Although a lot of people say they like living in mobbed-up neighborhoods. In mobbed-up neighborhoods, the snow gets swept quickly, the garbage gets picked up on time, so you have to pay a little protection money. How terrible is it? Whatever. Maybe that's an example of praying for the welfare of a lousy government. It's a lousy government, but it's still better than anarchy, so to speak. Okay? I think Reb Chanina would say this about the Romans. I doubt that he would say this about the Nazis or the communists. Right? Because the Nazis and the communists did the job of swallowing people alive for the anarchists. The anarchists didn't have to need anarchy. Right? The government was doing a little government-sponsored anarchy, so to speak. But at any rate, it happens to be a fact that in most Siddurim, it's not there anymore in the Art Scroll Siddur, and I think I know why. But if you look at most editions of Siddurim, you will find that in between the Shabbos morning service and the Shabbos Musaf service, when they're about to replace the Torah scrolls in the Ark, there's usually a prayer on behalf of the government. Okay? And if you look in ancient and 200, 300-year-old prayer books, you'll see prayers for the Kaiser and for the Tsar. It's a famous joke from Fiddler on the Roof. Is there a blessing for the Tsar? Yes, my God, bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. Right? But the truth of the matter is that Jews prayed for the Tsar. The Tsar who was oppressing them, the Tsar who was sponsoring state-sponsored pogroms. Right? Kaisers, German Kaisers were prayed for. And certainly, I remember when I was a kid going to shuls, where everyone stood up and they made a bilingual prayer. First they said in Hebrew, and then they said in English, and these were shuls where nothing was said in English. But this prayer was said in English as well, a prayer for the President, the Vice President, and all the cabinet members of the United States of America. I remember it clearly as a kid. All right? And it's really a fulfillment of what it says in this Mishnah. Pray for the welfare of the government, if not for that fear of retribution of the government, that the government is not going to let things just go crazy, go out of control, be reduced to anarchy, there would be anarchy. There's a precedent for this, says Rashi on the Mishnah. There's a precedent for this even before prayer started. And that is, we find that on the holiday of Sukkot, when the temple stood, there was an order of the Ayin Parei Chag, or Shivim Parei Chag. They used to bring, as part of the Musaf sacrifice, the additional sacrifice on the holiday of Sukkot, every day of Sukkot, they would sacrifice X amount of bullocks, of young oxen, yearling oxen. The first day there would be 13, the next day there would be 12, and so it went until on the seventh day of Sukkot, a total of 70 oxen had been sacrificed. Now 70 is not an arbitrary number in Jewish thought. Okay? There were 70 souls that descended into Egypt. There were 70 members on the Supreme Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Does anyone know the first place that we associate the number 70 with in the Torah? Right. Okay. It says, Yatsev Gvulos Amim L'Mispa B'nai Yisrael is a pasuk in the Torah that says, God set up the boundaries of the nations according to the number of the children of Israel. The children of Israel in that context meaning those who made the descent into Egypt. In other words, we hold that there are 70 basic national groupings. 70 basic nations, 70 basic language groups, okay? And I don't care if the UN inflates to 150 member nations, 180, 250 member nations, okay? In Jewish thought, the basic breakup of humanity, the national groupings of humanity, are the number 70. So the idea of sacrificing 70 oxen on Sukkot, these were sacrifices that were more universal in character. The other sacrifices that we do are parochial or particular, they're for the Jewish people. For all the Jewish people, they're karbonos tzibur, what we call congregational, national sacrifices, right? But they're really not on behalf of the nations of the world. But on Sukkot, there was this service of bringing musafim, bringing these additional sacrifices that were on behalf of the rest of humanity. Each individual nation had its sacrifice that was being brought on its behalf. Because like I said, there was a total of 70 sacrifices brought, and that corresponded precisely to the 70 nations. Says Rashi, we know that in general, tefillah b'makom tefillah teknu, we know the idea of our prayer. Prayer is supposed to be a surrogate for sacrifices. We don't have a temple anymore, we can't bring sacrifices, but instead of sacrifices, the famous words of the prophet, unashalma param svaseinu. Our lips will pay the debt of the bullocks, of the oxen, that we ought to have brought, that we should have brought. So just as in temple times, there were sacrifices that were being brought on behalf of the nations of the world, so too, in post-temple times, when we can't bring sacrifices anymore, you pray for your national government, at the very least for your national government. Not for the entire world, at least for your national government. And like I said, the precedent seems to be even pretty rotten national governments. Now again, I don't think this means Nazi Germany. I don't think where you have a government that's entire raison d'etre is the destruction of the Jewish people, that we're not talking about. But even a government that seems to oppress the Jewish people, if that's not their whole objective, as in the case of the Romans, that seems to be the precedent for this mission. Parenthetically, I want to tell you a very interesting insights from Rabbi Shapiro before we move on. He's keying in onto the grammatical irregularity in this mission. It says Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim, Rabbi Chanina the deputy of the Kohanes, plural. It should have said Rabbi Chanina Sgan Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Chanina the deputy high priest. What does it mean Kohanim? So it says as follows: how is it possible to be deputy for plural, for many Kohanim? The rule was, what happens in the United States of America when Kennedy was assassinated? Immediately they swore Lyndon Johnson in. All right? Whenever there's an assassination, that's part of the office of vice president. You get sworn in. You're there to be the president's understudy. That's what you're there for. So if anything ever happened to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and it doesn't have to be death, it could be a ritual impurity. All right? This guy gets elevated to the status of being a Kohen Gadol and finished. He's the Kohen Gadol. Says Rabbi Shapiro, the Roman procurators of Jerusalem were meddlers in our internal affairs. There was no separation of church and state. There was no freedom of religion. Right? The Romans mixed in wherever they saw fit to mix in. And there were a lot of political appointments to the office of Kohen Gadol. Right? As a matter of fact, the Mishnah in the beginning of Tractate Yuma talks about, even under the Greeks, the office of the Gadol started being called by a Greek name, the Lishkas Palhedrin, the office of the Palhedrin. Palhedrin is a Greek word. Except because the Greeks installed a lot of their own picks to be the Kohen Gadol, to be the high priest. So in other words, there was a glass ceiling that Rabbi Chanina couldn't break through. Okay? The Romans stepped in and they impeded his advancement to the office of Kohen Gadol multiple times. And therefore he wasn't a Sgan Kohen, he wasn't a deputy to the Kohen Gadol, he was a deputy to plural, to many Kohanim Gadolim. He got stuck in that office from multiple superiors when he shouldn't have been. He shouldn't have, as soon as the first Kohen Gadol got disqualified for whatever reason, died or whatever other reason he got disqualified, he should have advanced. So both on a personal level and on a communal level, you look at the historical period in which he lived, Reb Chanina. He lived under the Romans, the evil, oppressive Romans, and he said, pray for them. On a personal level, okay, these guys messed me up. Okay? The golden ring was within my grasp. I could have been the Kohen Gadol. I never made it. I died a Skana Kohanim. I was the deputy Kohen Gadol. Doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's not about a personal issue that my interests are being impeded. The lesson of this mission is that in general, for the common weal, for the good of not just an individual or a minority group or an interest group, for the good of society as a whole, it's best to have government. Because when you look at the alternative, when you look at anarchy, it's not pretty. The Miri adds something very interesting. He says, if you look at the next Mishnah, Mishnah Gimel, again on page 557, and let's skip the Hebrew. Let's go on 557, the Mishnah 3. Chanina ben Tradion says, if two sit together and no words of Torah between them, and he talks about people learning Torah together. And much of Pirkei Avos deals with Torah study and how to acquire Torah, and Dayanim, ecclesiastical judges, the experts of Torah, issuing Torah rulings for the good of Jewish society. And the Miri says that the segue of these two Mishnayos is to say, okay, where you don't have political stability, where you don't have some kind of a secular government, a secular authority, Torah cannot really operate either. When you have an anarchic state of affairs, okay, when politically there are no laws, then morally there can be no ethics. That's what the Miri says. It's ruinous, not just to the king or to the government, whatever the form of government may be. It's ruinous to the interests of Torah too, when you don't have our government functioning. And that's why you have to pray on the government's behalf. The Nefesh HaChaim adds a very interesting thing. He says, I speak about this very often, what I call the absolute value of spirituality. If you look on the number line, a 2 may be greater than a 1. But a -3, the absolute value of a -3 is greater than a 2. Or more simply put, not talking mathematically, the higher they come, the harder they fall. And when something has a potential for greatness, it also has an equal potential for greater depravity, if you don't watch it. So it says like this. We know in the law of the jungle, there's a food chain. All right? There could be an alpha male, the biggest, the toughest animal in the group, takes control of the rest of the group, oppresses the rest of the group, hunts and eats the rest of the group, whatever. If you look in the food chain in the ocean, okay, the bigger fishes are always eating the smaller fishes. Okay? Fishes of equal size, generally speaking, don't eat one another. How could it even fit? How could you digest it if you ate a fish of equal or greater size? So, but the Tana over here is careful to say, Ishis re'ehu chayim b'loi.
Which page is that?
Page 556. The Hebrew is on 556, Mishnah Beis. 556, Mishnah Beis. Why do you pray for the welfare of the government? She'el malay mayra, if not for the fear of the government, Ishis re'ehu chayim b'loi. People would eat their peers alive. Human beings can be worse than animals in a certain sense, in terms of anarchy, in terms of viciousness, in terms of big meism. Right? People can often eat others who are the same size as them, maybe even bigger than them if they're ambitious enough. Right? So, in a certain sense, it's even scarier, or it's even more violent, venal, however you want to describe whatever negative adjective you want to attach to it. It's worse than the law of the jungle. In the jungle, big eats small. In human society, when anarchy reigns, people of equal stature, so to speak, can swallow one another alive. Rabbi Yonah says a very interesting thing, and the kind of thing you perhaps, looking at the somewhat insular and closed, and is it good for the Jews kind of attitude that you very often find among Torah observant Jews. I found it a little bit surprising to find one of the classic Rishonim say what he's about to say over here. And he says as follows. He says, you don't pray for the government just because it happens to be good for the Jews, or it happens to be good for the New Yorkers. You pray for the New York, municipal government. You want a strong mayor, a strong police commissioner. You like there shouldn't be a lot of crime in the streets in New York City. It's not just about that, because in a certain sense, that's also a selfish, self-serving prayer. You're not really praying for the government. You're praying for the government, like the Mishnah ends off. It's really not a prayer for government. Again, self-serving prayer. I'm trying to protect myself. The agents of my protection are the government. Without the government, someone's going to swallow me. Or swallow my friend, or swallow my family. So because I don't want that, I pray for the government. Ben says it goes much more than that. The best way to describe his attitude is a German word I once learned, a Weltschmerz. Familiar with the word Weltschmerz? You ever heard of Weltschmerz? A Weltschmerz means a pain for the whole world. A sense of empathy. A sense of there are people suffering out there. There's a broken world. A lot of people don't have it nearly as good as us. Right? Maybe I could get by. Maybe I'm financially independent. Maybe I'm well connected. I don't need such a strong government. Right? It's funny, with this big economic meltdown, all the people who are crying the crocodile tears, not crocodile tears. I don't want to seem petty, but let's put it this way: the poorer you were to start with, the less you had to lose in the stock market fall. Right? And I would think that the mega rich people are better insulated from the stock market fall than the poor people are anyway. And yet, they're the ones, jumping out of windows and who knows what. right, for the most part. So the idea is, you don't just worry about yourself. Really what it means when it says is, having mevakesh b'shlama shel malchus, you should pray for the good of the government. It doesn't even mean your particular government, municipal, state, federal. We're talking about governments all over the world. We're talking about a world that's at peace. Right? We know what kind of drains on economies wars can be. Right? Although sometimes there's wartime profiteering, there's the government military contractors that do very well. But we know very often that wars are ruinous, besides to the human resources of a country, to the financial resources of a country. The agriculture, there's scorched earth policies. When a conquering enemy comes in, they ruin the fields, they ruin the agriculture of a country for years to come. They plant minefields where corn and wheat should be planted, and then it's unusable for 50, 60 years afterwards. You know, during the Civil War, the American Civil War, so the Confederacy was looking to Europe for diplomatic recognition. They wanted France to recognize them, they wanted Britain to recognize them, and that would have helped their war effort. It might have brought the Union to its knees. But at the beginning of the war, 1861, 1862, a lot of Europe was sort of what we call fence sitting. They were trying to hedge their bets. Who's going to win this war? Who should we support? The Union or the Confederacy? And they asked the famous Baron Edmund de Rothschild, the patriarch of the famous Rothschild International Banking Company. They said, who do you think is going to win this war?
In France. He was living in France.
Right. So they asked him, who do you think is going to win this war? And he said, the Union. And you should know, at that time, the Union was suffering reversals on the battlefield one after the other. And they asked him, why? Why do you say that? They seem to have much better generals in the South. So he said, because they have the larger purse. They got more money. They have more money to finance the war. And if it'll be a long war, it'll be a war of attrition. Ultimately, you know, the industrial and the economic strength of the North will cause them to prevail. And it was really prophetic what he said. Because most military historians of that war say that the South had much braver soldiers and certainly much greater generals, greater tacticians. I mean, you can't begin to compare the Union generals to the Confederacy's general. Robert E. Lee was, you know, an unbelievable military genius. Stonewall Jackson, whatever. It's the legendary names in the ranks of military history buffs. You know, study their campaigns still to this very day. So we know that countries and governments at war, you know, generally speaking, sometimes wartime economies boom, but generally speaking, wars are ruinous for countries. Certainly for the countries that get vanquished, who try to wage a war and lose it. Okay, and I'm not enough of a political scientist to understand the interconnectedness of it, but a lot of people say that the war in Iraq has something to do with the credit meltdown and with the financial markets meltdown. And the fact that it costs something like, I forgot what the price, like $42 billion a day to maintain our army in Iraq has a lot to do with the way our economy has been going as well. So, Rabbi Yaina says a person has to have, like I said, that German word, a Weltschmerz. You got to feel the pain, to borrow a line from President Clinton. You got to feel the pain of the world. You got to feel the pain of those less fortunate than you. And he says, this is the way of tzaddikim, of the righteous, of the saintly people. Like King David writes in the Psalms, V'ani b'chaloisam levushi sok, inisi batzayim pishi. He says, when they were sick, when they were ill, I wore sackcloth and I fasted. I want to feel their pain. I want to be with them. You know, I had a neighbor once who was going to school to be an occupational therapist. And part of her course before she received the degree was, I don't know if every program does it, but this program did, she had to navigate for 2 days in a wheelchair. They had to ride around in a wheelchair. And the idea was they wanted to foster a sense of empathy with the patients. As, you know, in a certain sense you can go callous, you can go impatient, like, you know, what we wanted to do, if you know what it means, to have to navigate without legs, to navigate while sitting down, you bring a different sensibility to the job, a different patience, a different compassion, and a different dedication to get them out of that. If they're capable of being able again to stand on their own 2 feet and get out of the wheelchair, you have that sense of urgency of how important that is. If they've got to spend the rest of their lives maneuvering a wheelchair, to get them to be able to do it with agility and proficiency. This idea of sensing the pain of another person. They say the Schwartz, the second Ger Rebbe, had a lot of Hasidim who were drafted. Poland was part of Russia at that time. And during his reign, so to speak, was when the Russo-Japanese War was going on. And they say he had a lot of Hasidim who were soldiers in the trenches during the Russo-Japanese War and part of the Russian army. And they say for the entire duration of the Russo-Japanese War, the Schwartz slept on the bare ground. He refused to sleep on a bed. And he said, my Hasidim have to sleep on the bare ground, and I'm going to be in a comfortable feather bed. This is, we're all in this together. We're all part of it. I should sleep on a bed. So this idea that a person, when they pray, it's not just make a special prayer, like I said, stick it into the liturgy. In the middle of davening, pray for the president and the vice president. It's much more than that. Having mispalel b'shleim b'shalom, that should be what informs your entire approach to prayer. When you pray, you're not praying for yourself as an individual. You're praying for a broken world, or at the very least, a broken nation, a suffering nation. That's the idea. And you'll notice that Jews have a concept of communal prayer. Jews have a concept of praying the prayers with a liturgy that's communal. Okay? Return us, God, to your Torah. Heal us. It's never return me, heal me. It's never about me. It's always about the community at large. I'm just trying to remember one thing here. Yeah, the Kuzari, a famous philosophical work. It's an argument if it's historically accurate or if it was just a fictional device, a fictional construct. But basically the story of the Kuzari, which is written by Rabbi Levi, was that the king of the Khazars, a people from the Ural Mountains, had a dream that happened to him 3 times, where the voice of God speaks to him in this dream and says, your intent is desirable to me, but your actions are not. Which he took to mean that he's got basically a good theology and his heart is in the right place, but practically speaking, he doesn't know which religion to observe. So he invited 3 scholars, 1 Jewish, 1 Muslim, 1 Christian, 3 great world religions at the time, to debate in front of him on the merits of their religion. And he said, whoever wins this debate, I and my entire kingdom are going to convert to that religion. It's called the Book of the Kuzari, as in the king of the Khazars. Right? So, again, the way the construct of the book goes, so there's about a half a page devoted to the presentation of the Christian scholar, about 3 pages devoted to the presentation of the Muslim scholar, and the rest of the book is the Jewish scholar speaking to the king. And like I said, it's a very basic book in Jewish philosophy because what he's trying to do is explain the rationality of all the mitzvahs of the Torah to this Khazar king. So one of the questions that the king puts to the sage, the Jewish sage, is what's this communal prayer business? I don't understand it. Wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be more heartfelt if people prayed on their own? Let every person pray according to what they, instead of reading from a script, as it were. Right? Let every person pray according to their needs. Everyone will end up praying anyway, but why does it have to be communally? And he had several answers, the sage of the Jews. But one of the answers he said was, he says, when a community prays together, and when you pray on behalf of a community, you're not going to pray for things that damage other people. It's almost itself a governmental thing. Some compromises are going to have to be struck here. The liturgy, the things that you pray for, when you're all on your lonesome, when nobody's hearing you before God, you could pray for your own advancement at the expense of somebody else. But when you're praying in a community and for the community, then you're praying for things that are not hurtful to anyone. You're praying for the common weal. Interesting, very, very fascinating. A lot of pundits were saying about our president-elect, President Obama, that when he got up the next morning, after his acceptance speech, he woke up and said, "Oh boy, what did I get myself into?" Right? It's not easy to be the president of the United States and the leader of the free world. The campaign gives you a rush. The campaign, you're thinking about all the power, and then you wake up the next morning, you got to start thinking about all the responsibility. So it's not easy being God either, so to speak. I don't mean to be flip, but there's a very cute passage in this book of the Kuzari. He says, try to imagine what it is to be God. You have two guys in the same synagogue on the same pew. They're both praying, and they have to pray about weather. One guy's an innkeeper, and one guy's a farmer. And the innkeeper is thinking to himself, he says, God, please, no rain. You got to keep those roads dry. If the roads turn muddy, there's not going to be any traffic on the roads. Nobody's going to come to my inn, and my wife and myself and my kids are all going to starve to death. And the farmer's saying, God, it's a Dust Bowl season out there. There hasn't been any rain. If the rain doesn't come, my crops are ruined. Really, you only have another 24 hours, and this is it. This crop is going to go totally to waste. What's God supposed to do in a case like that, so to speak? Okay, I don't have time to tell you over his answer, but I'm just saying this idea of, not just in government, but in prayer. There are different parties, there are conflicting interests, there are special interest groups, right? Everybody wants their own thing, so to speak. But when you pray for the government, as it were, what it really means is pray for society as a whole. When you pray for society as a whole, you're not going to pray for anything hurtful. On the contrary, you're always going to be praying to reduce the pain of others. Okay, I want to share with you something. I think I've spoken enough about civics and citizenship and what it means a good citizen. I want to share with you something that Reb Chaim Volozhiner brings down from the Ritva on this Mishnah, Mevakesh B'Shlomo Shel Malchus. But just to remind you, to give you some reference point for what the Ritva is saying, let's look at one other Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It's right towards the beginning. Take a look on page 545. Mishnah 3, on 545. Antigonus, leader of Socho, received the tradition of Rav Shimon the Righteous. He used to say, be not like servants who serve their master for the sake of receiving a reward. Instead, be like servants who serve their master not for the sake of receiving a reward. In other words, basically what he's saying is that our inner religious life, that our relationship with God should not be self-serving. It doesn't mean that God is not going to reward us. God is going to reward us for good behavior, for good thoughts, for good emotions, for good speech. We'll be rewarded.
Good action also.
Yes, good deeds. That's how I started this day. Fine. But that should not be the motivation. That's not why I do it. I don't do it, as Reverend Ike used to say, don't wait for that piece of pie in the sky after you die. I can get a piece of pie right here for you right now with a pink Cadillac with a cherry on top, right? We're not looking for the rewards in the next world. We're not looking for the rewards in this world. If we're really sincere, Ovdei Hashem, if we're really sincere servants of God, that should be selfless. Says the Ritva, an amazing thing. He says, Havim mevakesh b'shlomo shel malchus. When you pray, don't just pray to God. Pray for God. The ultimate king and the ultimate kingdom is God himself. Every one of our brachas starts off, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu. What's the next word? Melech HaOlam. King of the universe, king of the cosmos. We relate to God as a king, and we relate to divine providence, to God's conduct of his creation, as kingdom, as government. He's governing the world. He's governing it all. What does it mean to say you should pray on behalf of God's government? What's that supposed to mean? I can understand what it means to pray on behalf of the U.S. government, or even the Tsar's government, or the Roman government. What does it mean to pray on behalf of God? So, in explaining the Ritva, Reb Chaim Volozhiner offers two very striking allegories. He says, think of it all like this. Basically, every human prayer, whether it's individual or whether it's communal, is predicated on a neediness. I need something. I lack something. I'm in pain about something. A lack usually equals a pain. right? I'm sick. Being sick usually hurts, right? Heal me. I'm poor. Being poor certainly hurts, right? Enrich me. I'm dispersed. I'm a Jew living in exile. Bring me back to Israel. Exile stinks. It's a terrible state to be in. These are all hurtful things. So Chaim Volozhin, and it's a little bit harsh what I'm about to say, but it's worth saying anyway. Chaim Volozhin says, we don't believe in a vengeful God. Okay? Punishment, suffering that we're enduring, okay, is not because God is angry and lashing out at us. That's not what it's all about. Okay? When we sin, we did grave damage to our own souls. Okay? And this is therapeutic. He says he gives the marshal, and excuse me, it's a little scatological, but it's his marshal, it's his allegory, not mine. He says, there's a 1-year-old child that soiled its diaper. And it's screaming and it's yelling, right? And then the mother comes to clean it up, and it's screaming and yelling even more, right? Especially if it's soiled a little while ago and it's got a little bit of a rash, now the wipes have a little alcohol and it hurts. They're screaming, right? But the mother knows, I can't leave the child in this condition. It's only going to get worse. He's going to smell worse. The rash will get worse. He'll catch some disease if I don't get rid of this fecal matter. It's horrible for the child. I don't care that he's screaming now. It may hurt him, but it's for his own good. So it says everything that's happening to us is for our own good. What are we praying for God to assuage the situation for? It's for our own good. He's cleaning up the mess. We soiled our diapers, and he's cleaning up the mess. Well, what do we want from God? He should let us sit on our soiled diapers? What?
But you said that we should pray for God also, not for ourselves, but for God. What does God needs from us?
Exactly.
So what's the point here?
So the point is that's the point. The point is that, of course, in a human baby, in a biological function, it's impossible. Of course, every baby is going to soil its diaper or urinate in its diaper, and it has to be changed. But in theory, okay, a person shouldn't have to sin. Much better off. Lamaisa, in point of fact, it hurts the mother that the baby is crying while the diaper is being changed. Right. Of course she understands she's doing it for the baby's own good, but it bothers her that she's got to pain the baby even for this. So the proper way to pray is not ease my pain because it's hurting me. Ease my pain because it's hurting you. That's what we're praying for. That's another level of meaning, says the Ritva, as explained by Chaim Volozhin. What it means in this Mishnah, Hamavakir V'Shlom V'Shlom Malchus. Okay, I'm going to call it a night over here, and Ed, is there a collection next to him? There's a collection next to him. If anyone has any comments or questions, feel free.
I have a question.
Okay. I just want to tell you before you start your question that watch your email inboxes. Those of you who don't have email, I'll have Mrs. Mayo call you. We are probably starting a new series next week. At worst, we'll have one more class in Pirkei Avos, and then we'll start a new series the following week.
It's not on Monday.
Page 545.
Monday is bad for you?
Wednesday.
What?
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday I was only doing in the summer as a substitute for Rabbi Turk.
I have 2 classes tonight.
Oh,
So
boy.
I went to the Tulam group, and I couldn't go to the other one, but it's very important to go because who gives that group is Rabbi Wagner's son. Rabbi Wagner who
From Young Israel of Forest Hill, sure.
Yeah, so, and I want to be there to see that people want to come, but I apologize for him that I'm running away.
So the question is,
Okay.
number 3,
What page?
545. Be not like servants who serve their master for the sake of receiving a reward.
Okay. Be like the servants who serve the master, not for the sake of receiving a reward.
Correct.
Okay.
Let the awe of heaven be upon you.
Right.
The goodness of this thing that you're doing must be upon you. This is a wonderful thing to do. Whether someone asks me to arrange the benches or not, it is the right thing to do. I want to do it. In fact, it's my nature to do it.
Okay.
And this has been my thought all my life. And in fact, this is what I promoted all my life. Except I am now told by rabbis, and my question to you, my problem, I'd like you to reconcile the two. Don't do it because it's the right thing to do. Don't be taken up too much with how awesome, righteous, and holy it is. But do it because you are obeying God as a mitzvah.
Right.
So I'm chasing after that idea there. How would you like to put those two things together? I see here is beautiful, but on the other hand, no. Don't do it because you're righteousness or for righteousness or because you're good to begin with. No, you're obeying God. In fact, it hurts you to do it.
Right.
But God says to do it, that's why you do it.
Right. 1 second.
May I say something
Amen.
before you answer? Amen. I think, I don't know what Rabbi Schwartz will say. I think because when you want to do it, because you feel right to do it, it's easy to do it. Sometimes God says something that is against your nature, and then you still do it because God says that's a bigger mitzvah than when you do it on your own. If you do it on your own, it's natural for you. It goes smoothly, it's fine. Am I right or wrong?
There are those of us, including me, who it is difficult to do.
Right.
Awkward and inconvenient. It costs you time and whatever. But you do it.
Right.
But yet you tell me, no, don't do it. Do it because God ordered you to do it. It's a mitzvah to do.
Okay. So I'm going to answer you in a very
Terrible.
not terrible, an extreme example.
Yeah.
Okay. No offense intended, but I'm just trying. I'm trying to cut right to the chase over here. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that when Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemai, shaved in the morning and straightened his tie in the morning and looked into the mirror, he said, "Oh, you monster, you evil incarnate, you monster on two legs, you're the worst human being ever to inhabit the earth." You think that's what his self-image was? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He thought...
I'm not so sure. Didn't you look at his mustache and says, I should do something about this stupid mustache?
Yeah, well, the mustache was truly monstrous. There's no two ways around that, okay? But the personality, I mean, he looked at himself, and more importantly, most Germans looked at him as the savior of his people, as the savior of humanity in his organization of reality. He thought, Himmler used to say, that it's a famous declassified speech that he gave to a convention of the SS. He said, what we are doing is one of the most glorious chapters in the annals of human history, but sadly, no one will ever read about it. No one can ever read about it. But it's truly one of the most glorious things that's ever happened in human history. He was referring to the annihilation of the Jews. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is like this. Human conceptions of doing something because it's right presuppose that I know what's right. Okay? And I'm not talking about monsters like Hitler. Even men of good conscience can agree to disagree, not just about what's expedient and what's best for me, but really what's right. And there have been very, very great arguments. I mean, let's look at the American political debate right now. Okay, you have the right to life people against the right to choice people. Okay, both camps are extremely self-righteous, are extremely convinced that not only that they're right, but that they're good, and that their opponents are not only wrong but evil. All right, it's an irreconcilable difference. Stem cell issues. There are any 20 moral, ethical issues that you could say this about. That there's very strong feelings on both camps, and both camps are convinced that they're fighting for the right. All right? So that's the danger of doing something that's awesome and not doing it because it's advantageous, but doing it because it's right, when you factor out the idea of a mitzvah. Nobody's telling you not to get excited about it and not to do it because it's right. What the rabbis are asking you to do is to recalibrate your sense and definition of what's right and wrong. From where does your morality derive? Does God decree what's right and wrong, or does your own rationale decree what's right and wrong, or is it some mixture of the two? And that's a third possibility. Right? But at any rate, I think that would be my answer to the question.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gents, it's been a long day for me. Let's go to the collation. I don't know. You're telling me you can't make it Monday night. It's something for me to think about. The other people can't make it Tuesday night. I don't know. We'll have to see. It's definitely not Wednesday night.
I teach on Monday evening. I'm coming from a class too where I was teaching, and I left one student in the hands of a visiting professor. So